Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Kellie de Leon with Treasure Data, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Saul Rashidi, SVP Chief Analytics Officer at the Estee Lauder Companies. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
What do you wish you could share with your colleagues in marketing or other kind of areas of the business that you work with? What do you wish they could understand about your role, or something you wish that you could kind of break through to them?
I think have a little bit more empathy about what we do,
Mm.
because everyone and no one owns data. So I may have the accountability, I may have the responsibility, but I don't have the full decision rights. And it's really hard navigating those waters. And when things are working, no one pats you on the back. When things aren't working, you're the first person to hear. So it's almost as if your job is to take escalations.
Mm-hmm.
My running joke with my team is I'm like, when's the last time you flushed the toilet and called your plumber and said thank you? Because it functions. You don't. When's the last time you clicked a switch and the electricity turns on, you called your electrician, you're like, thank you. You don't. It's just expected commodity-based services. And in 2022, data is a commodity service. Like, it should just be there. It's expected. And when it's not, folks can get heated. But I always say, one, just have a bit more empathy about what we're trying to do. It's an area that's been underinvested in, historically speaking, for non-tech companies. And we've got to play catch up while meeting current expectations. That's a really hard position to be in.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second is just always know, even though the company's really interested in the area and it's at the forefront and it's a key strategic pillar, the investments don't always align with the aspirations. So I always say it's like I'm a endurance athlete with one hand and one foot tied behind my back. That's just how it feels. And if there could be some level of empathy around that, that would be great too. And then the other is the fundamentals that sometimes need to be put in place are not solved for overnight. This is repetitive decisions or repetitive choices of not making investments. So we're trying to catch up 10, 20, 40, 50, 100 years of decision-making, to modernize it to 2022. It's going to take some time. And we can go as fast as the investments and the resources and the decisions align us, but balancing the cultural norms with the appetite for change, with, I hate to use a buzzword, change management, and how much the business is really willing to invest in this, all dictate how fast we can move. It's not reflective upon the leader in and of itself. So I would say, if you can, just keep those elements and components in mind.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I think, as you mentioned, it's a buzzword for sure, but change management and thinking through, how to overcome that 10 or 20 or 100 years of past history is certainly can be a difficult role. And you mentioned oftentimes you're coming into an organization where obviously they're making the investment, data is at the forefront, but sometimes you're coming into a challenging environment, or things that have not been maybe the way that they had hoped they would be, and that's why you're on the scene. We've talked a lot about kind of more the human aspect of things. I'm wondering if you have any sort of top line advice for business leaders who are really starting to try to break down these data silos, separate from the people side of things. Where do you start to break down those data silos?
Yeah. So, like families, you've got good family members and some troublemaker family members, you've got good reunions, you've got messy reunions. That's how the relationships are with who we represent, the people we work with. I'm really fortunate. I've worked for some phenomenal brands with some phenomenal leaders. And I'm just so happy that even though this area is messy, these companies have made a choice to actually put a focus on it, right? Which wasn't the case 5 years ago. I've been in this space over 20 years, right? I always say we're the back office geeks that were sitting in the cubicles looking at our Dilbert like cartoons and like our Marvel action configures working in pivot tables galore because we didn't have all the fancy tools available for us in 99 and 98, you know. I was a master pivot table manipulator. That's how I did this work. So I'm just happy that the role of a CDO and a CAO actually exists. It's given us folks who are accidentally stepped into this space, because I don't think anyone grows up and says, this is what I want to do for a living, a space to play and roam. And it's technical and it's creative. Of all my former employees for giving me the opportunity to be both technical and creative and build phenomenal assets and capabilities. So I want to make sure that it's not all, it's sort of boohoo and it's hard and it's difficult. It is, of course it is. So I think there's that acknowledgement. But the one thing that I would say as folks are approaching this is we use terms like change management and data literacy very loosely, generic, very high in the sky level, like we know we need to do it. But the one thing that I think that's made the most impact in everything I've ever seen, and I learned this from a former leader of mine, she since moved on to another company, but she was absolutely brilliant. They actually had a 2 to 3 day executive workshop on end-to-end what is data and analytics. And our CEO actually mandated that anyone who is a VP in a pub attend this executive workshop. We brought in an outside consulting vendor, a third party, and we built the curriculum together. When we say data and analytics, what does that mean? When we say data science, what does that mean? When we say data engineering, they're like, oh, technical role, it must be an IT role. No, actually, that's a fundamental role within a data science practice. When we talk about predictive models, what's the difference between forecasting, prediction, and prescriptive? Like this stuff isn't known. Or my running joke is if you ask someone to define master data, you ask 50 people, you're going to get 250 different types of answers. So the goal is to normalize the nomenclature, get a baseline understanding of what this world entails, and then going through a few use case exercises of if you're running a marketing campaign and you want to activate a new consumer segment, what does that look like end to end? Before you even get to the campaign and see if it even worked, how do we pull the data from both internal and external? How do we go through aggregation normalizing? What are all the painful steps that teams have to go through? And then from the prepping, and then from the modeling, and then from the training until we finally come up with an output that we're willing to share because we're confident enough that I think this is the consumer segment we should market to. Even a generic business case, and it could be from supply chain and inventory to financial forecasting and demand planning to consumer segmentation to a 360 view of a consumer to understand what are the ratings and reviews and social sentiment, and just taking them through a few examples. We have a tendency of using buzzwords and hearing buzzwords, but we in our space take for granted that when we work with our business leaders, they're running a P&L. Their job is not to learn our discipline. Their job is to run a business. But if we can take 2 to 3 days up front and get the nomenclature set and get everyone aligned of what this practice actually means, it was probably one of the smartest decisions that a former company of mine that I worked for actually took in, and it came top down and it worked. It didn't mean we didn't have good days or bad days. We had those too. And it didn't mean that there were competing agendas. We had those too. But at a minimum, we started off singing the same song from the same hymn sheet versus on totally different verses.
Yeah.
It helped a ton.
Such a powerful way to also show organizational investment and buy-in to what you're doing. And as you said, getting everyone to at least make sure we're talking the same language and understanding each other when we run into challenges. That's a great segue. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit just about sort of data management and analytics roadmap and strategy and some of the things that you work through. Here we are in 2022 at the intersection of so many things that have changed in the last handful of years, and I'm sure very much impact your work. I'm wondering if you would highlight, some of the key things that you've seen sort of evolve or change about how you need to think about data and analytics strategy in the last couple of years when things have been changing so rapidly.
I think the most and obvious one for me is not everything needs to be solved through AI. Sometimes you need a hammer and not a jackhammer. And, you know, folks, we have vendors and partners and software that are taking advantage of the fact that this is a buzzword. But for me, it's keep it simple. I still follow the KISS theory. If you can run a SQL, like a simple SQL job, it's going to get you the insights. It doesn't need to be solved through AI. True AI use cases are far and few in between. And they are complicated. It is not easy by any means because it hasn't been done before. But if you're trying to figure out your optimization models for demand planning, that doesn't require, that's been around for decades. You know, if you're looking at consumer segmentation models, it's been around a really, really long time. There are just certain use cases that AI is needed for, and they're fewer in between versus those that you can solve with existing capabilities that are very mature, that are already available. So I would say one of the few things that's changed recently that I'm not a big fan of, it's just complicated things more, is separating how do we solve a problem for what's cool and trending in the industry. So the marketing behind it, and not everything needs to be solved through AI. I think the second one is the role of a data scientist. Everyone is under the notion that to generate insights, you need data science. You don't. You actually need decision science, and decision science can be determined, quite frankly, by numerous skill sets within the analytics team. Whether you're a data analyst who runs SQL jobs, whether you're a statistician, you know, and you love your RStudio and your MATLAB, or whether you're a true data scientist, you're running Python and Scala jobs, doesn't matter your code of language. A lot of the business questions that we're still trying to answer, I don't want to say they're simple in nature, but it doesn't require double PhDs in mathematics and computer science to solve. So I would say also be very thoughtful and mindful that even though the world has shifted towards establishing and building data science practice, some of the most brilliant insights that have been generated by my teams never came from the data scientists. And that's a big one, right? So always find that balance of the type of resources you need. Don't assume that you need an electrical engineer when an electrician will do, and a really good one at that.
I wanted to just say thank you so much, Saul, for joining me today. This has been a really great conversation, digging into challenges and really opportunities that are available when companies can get data right. So thank you for taking the time. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kelly. I do appreciate all the great questions. The conversation definitely flowed really easily, so I did appreciate working with you. And a big thank you to CDO Magazine.